Hello, everyone there. We can't see how many you are at the moment, but I hope that we are even over 100 because we are 130 or about beforehand telling to join us today. This event is part of new European Bauhaus initiative, which was an idea of von der Leyen, and I think very many organizations in Europe are at the moment excited of the idea. Very transformative, very radical towards sustainability. And today we have the topic of carbon smart urban landscape, which is part of those events. Also Aalto University as a partner of this network is organizing. So we have 1.5 hours here time to have 3 nice presentations and then a discussion after that. We wish you all welcome. I'm Aija Staffans, an architect background researcher from the Department of Built Environment at Aalto. And I have here my colleague.
My name is Tiina Merikoski. My background is in landscape architecture, and I'm also at the Department of Built Environment, but also at the Department of Architecture.
So together we are hosting you. We also have Rosa Rantanen here. You can't see Rosa, but Rosa takes care of our social media activities. Then we have those background, let's say, networks here are 3 large Finnish strategic research council has funded 2 large consortiums working at Aalto and several other universities, and they are those in the background of this organizing this event. One is this SmartLand. Seppo Junnila, talking today later, is head of this consortium. And then we have the other one is, you can tell some words of it.
It's called Co-Carbon, and it started only last year, and it's about really studying urban green from many different perspectives, and also this kind of a large consortium and very high level research here in Finland.
And the third network is this Living Plus, which is one of Aalto's key research areas focusing on human-centered living environments. So we all wish you welcome here, and I think it's time to go. One concrete thing is about the recording. This event is going to be recorded, so you can also follow the presentations afterwards. Here you can see our program, and also we have the 3 presentations there, and the first of them is Ulrika Åkerlund. Ulrika comes from Boverket, which is the National Board of Housing, Building and Planning in Sweden. Ulrika's responsibilities in Boverket, they are green structure planning, ecosystem services and public urban space.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to this very interesting event and on this urgent topic. I was asked to give you a short introduction to what challenges we are facing in Sweden at the moment and give you an overview of 2 important policies concerning the urban landscapes and which are very, very closely connected to the new European Bauhaus. And we have been working a lot with urban ecosystem services in Sweden. I will give you a short brief of that, and then finally I will give you some examples of how some carbon smart urban landscapes in Sweden. We haven't talked so much about urban smartness in green areas in Sweden yet, but I think and I hope this will give us good input in this work. So can you please change the slide? I would like to take my departure on the urban development that we're seeing ahead. And most of it is not yet built, but is on the tables and the drawing desk at the moment. In Sweden, as in many countries, we have a big shortage of housing, and Boverket, the agency where I'm working, has calculated that in the next coming decade, we need to build between 592 and 664,000 new housing. And 7 of 10 of these housing needs to be built in already urban areas in the largest cities. So densification of urban areas is considered to be an important strategy for sustainable development. But we have never really discussed the level of density, and what we can see now is that the density is growing and growing. And the graph here to the left shows different blocks in Stockholm, and the level of density from the left. It's from the early 20th century, and now we are going towards the beginning of the 21st century, and it's growing. It's getting higher and higher, and denser and denser. So next slide, please. So shortly, this has been the answer to the mitigation of carbon dioxide. Dense urban areas with good access to public transports and working place, but very low access to urban green areas. The right photo is from the block from the previous slide, which is about to be built. And okay, maybe change one slide more. Yes, please, thank you. And this is from a newly built residential area in the center of Stockholm, where you can see it's very high-rise and very low level of daylight. And this courtyard is actually also a playground for the preschool, which is residing here in this area. So how can we even talk about carbon smart urban landscapes in this context? Next slide. Well, I will just shortly present two strategies and policies that the Swedish Parliament recently adopted, well, in 2018. It's the Swedish National Policy for Designed Living Environments, gestaltad livsmiljö and architecture in Swedish. The first one is a goal for National Goal for Architecture, Art and Design. And it says that architecture and design will help to create a sustainable, equitable, and less segregated society with carefully designed living environments, in which everyone is well placed to influence the development of their shared environment. And this is a quite interesting policy for architecture and design, I think, because it doesn't talk so much about what good architecture and design is. It talks very much about what good architecture and design can do. So what we're doing now is we're approaching a lot of other actors in society to and involve them and engage them in architectural discussions. And we talk a lot about what architecture and design can do to solving our social challenges, such as segregation and enhance social capital, and also reduce the effects of climate change. Next slide, please. The second strategy that we adopted is the strategy for livable cities. And here it really stresses the green areas of the urban environment. And it says by 2025, the majority of the municipalities must make use of and integrate urban green spaces and ecosystem services in urban environments, in planning, building, and mentioned of cities and towns. So this is an interim target that we are working with at the moment and try to support the municipalities in Sweden and other actors as well to reach this target. And it, of course, relates a lot to the Agenda 2030 and especially the sustainability goal of 11 and 13 and 15. Next slide, please. So hence we're working a lot with ecosystem services and the importance of urban green space. And we have developed guidelines and materials, and this is some of it, to communicate and to how to integrate the ecosystem services. And we have summarized them into 22 urban ecosystem services yet, as you can see here. Next slide, please. For example, protection from extreme weather, of course. There's a lot of, we stress a lot the regulating services of the ecosystem, such as green space and natural areas that protect against extreme weather, such as storms, high waves, flooding, downpours, landslides, and droughts. And this picture to the right here is from the city of Malmö, where you actually have a courtyard, which is where the level is lowered, and it's like small wetlands in the backyards where that can retain water during cloudburst, for example. And it actually was the only block in this area which wasn't flooded during the cloudburst of 2015. Next slide, please. But we also stress, of course, the green areas are largely important for mental well-being and physical health. And I think we have to put this very high up on the agenda as well, that spending time in green spaces and nature promotes physical and mental health. And this has been very obvious now in the light of COVID-19 and the lockdowns, also in Sweden. Next picture, please. But of course, we need to stress the multifunctionality of these areas, where carbon sequestration, of course, is one of them. And we need to design these areas so they actually can provide all these different ecosystem services. And this is a challenge, of course, to communicate this, how to actually balance all these different ecosystem services and provide them at the same time. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we haven't worked so much with carbon sequestration and the climate smartness, but, and I think a lot because we lack data, we don't really know. And the situation in the urban areas is quite different from the forest that we're looking at. But we are communicating, although, that we can see research from the US that annual carbon sequestration of an urban tree could be as much high as 65 kilos of carbon dioxide. And at the same time, as I mentioned, this multifunctionality, a big tree can absorb 1,000 liters of water in the canopy, which never reach the pipes. And it also can transpire 1,000 liters of water absorbed from the root system. So it's a very important part of the kind of a critical infrastructure that we need in our urban areas. Next slide, please. So I'll just give you some few examples. This is the first fossil-free preschool in the city of Gothenburg in Sweden. It's called Hoppet, and it's about to be built now. It's supposed to be finished by the autumn. And they work on, from a life cycle perspective, it's supposed to be fossil-free during the entire production and also during its lifetime. So of course the building is in wood for the carbon sequestration, but also the outdoor environment, I will show you next slide, please, is using a lot of the natural vegetation that they have. And next slide, just adding some elements that gives a lot of affordances to the children, like values for play and spending time, but also to, of course, create a sustainable play environment that could sustain over time. Next build, please. Next picture. I would also like to mention the landscape laboratory in Alnarp in the south of Sweden at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, which is a forest planted in forest-like landscape on land in about 20-25 years ago. And it's a multi-layered forest with different species, and here they try to build up a showcase on how you can use different species in urban areas and how you actually can create very interesting and inspiring urban landscapes in just a short time. 20 years is quite a short time, but also, of course, you store a lot of carbon in this area as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. We also have a lot of initiatives like working with the streetscape as a carbon sink. We use the coal, what do you call it? The carbon that you the char that you use from wood, and then you put it in the ground to store garbage, but also to retain water and provide nutrition for the trees. So this is the landscape architect office of Edge that have developed a handbook in livable streets and how you can use a street and design them as carbon sinks. Next slide, please. We're also involved in a Nordic cooperation where we work with urban ecosystem accounting, and this is how we try to find the facts and figures of all the ecosystem services. This is actually within the framework of the Nordic Council of Ministers that Boverket is coordinating. And we work together with Syke, the environmental center in Finland, and the Norwegian Institute for Environment, and see how we can calculate the general the value of ecosystem services in urban areas. And this is an example from Oslo with iTree. And then finally, I would just like to mention the Architects Declare. It's an initiative from Architects Sweden and Landscape, and this is a global initiative, of course, but with the landscape architects in Sweden have taken their own initiative and developed different tools to measure emissions from landscape projects, and they try to collect open data sources and how to measure emissions from the whole project, from the material, especially from the digging in the ground, and also the carbon sequestrations in the ground and the vegetation. However, we need generic data to develop for urban circumstances that we can put into the tool. And next slide, please. So we have to shift our mindset to what urban is, I think. These concrete paved courtyards are much less carbon smart than the lush courtyard to the right. It's the same kind of topology in the urban fabric, but completely different carbon sequestrations. So the urban landscapes need to be transformed, and I think the national policies in Sweden, such as the Swedish National Policy for Design Living Environments and the Strategy for Livable Cities, is supporting this. However, we must keep in mind that more than one thing in mind, and plan and design multifunctional landscapes that also contribute to biodiversity, people's health and well-being, and regulate water and local climate. So thank you very much, and can take the next slide. And these are some links to our work. And I would like to put a question, as I work at the national level, I would like to put a question to the audience and how you see that national politics and policies can support carbon smart landscapes in a good way.
Thank you so much, Ulrika. So we are asking you now to check the chat, and you should find a link to Mentimeter over there. And there the question is, you can see the question, and we hope you to, or wish you to give us insights, keywords, what comes to mind.
The next speaker in our program is Seppo Junnila. Seppo is a professor of real estate business at Aalto University in the Department of Built Environment. And his research focuses on life cycle technology and management and innovations. Before academia, Seppo has worked also in industry, so has a very multi-background to lead research at the moment. He's the leader of this SmartLand project, which is now also one organizer here in this event. So, Seppo, are you there?
Well, nice to be here. Today, actually, I talk about a very controversial issue of smart density in sustainable cities. Why it's controversial is that something is changing all the time, and what used to be a rational rule of thumb still 10-15 years ago, which was this densification, it's now controversial when we think about sustainable cities. And I try to explain why the change has happened. What are the reasons that the traditional rule of thumb doesn't apply anymore? the urban design when we consider about the smart density in sustainable cities. So why bother to understand the smart and sustainable urban landscape first? Well, actually, the buildings alone, could you change the slide? The next one. So I get the text. Yeah, thanks. So buildings alone, they are huge when it concerns about the sustainable society. What I typically say is that it's the only industry that can deliver the sustainable society. We need the contribution from other industries, but actually the other industries alone can't provide us with sustainable society. It's only us that can provide it. We need them, but they can't work without us. And if we move from the building sectors and real estate sector to the cities, the influence is even higher. So we know now that actually 80% of the GDP comes from the cities, but at the same time, some 75% of the environmental impact comes from the cities. And we know that a lot of people already live in cities, over half of the population, and in future even more. So it's core to whole sustainability that we understand the sustainable smart urban landscapes. Would you change to the next slide? So like I said already at the beginning, previously we thought that densification automatically is climate mitigation, and it made sense. Could you press the animation so that we can see? So the authorities at the highest level made the point, show the rationality why densification is good when we are trying to tackle with climate change. So if that was the situation still 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, what has changed and why it doesn't apply to current sustainable design anymore? That's a very good and important question and still controversial, but I try to show what are the big powers or big pressures behind that has changed the rationality. Next slide. So the world is changing, so I will have quite many of them. Don't put them on quite yet. But the world is changing. One issue was, for example, these electrical cars, which are very visual in public, but actually quite a minor detail for this change. So now please take the next one. One of the primary issues is that the whole society is electrifying. And in electrical networks, quite different rules apply than with heating networks, for example. In electrical networks, the small scale utilization of different sectors, like looking out of the silos, if you combine the transportation and you combine the living, energy consumption, energy production, and then you do the smart networking of those, you can produce a much more efficient system than what used to be the centralized city-based energy systems. The next animation, please. And then at the same time, we have a wide experience on these information networks that actually the cellular approach is much more efficient than traditional centralized mobile network or telephone network at that time. The next one, please. And then you can take the next also. And there are a lot of what are sort of material innovation in energy production, that the small scale, less intensity in solar cells and especially in heat pumps has come around. So the heat pumps seem to work much more efficiently, a bit like the engines in cars. Typically, people don't know that the traditional diesel engine is more energy efficient in producing energy, power, than actually the biggest electric power plants at the moment. So the industrial system of producing a big amount of something improves the product all the time so much, but that this big centralized engineering system can't compete in efficiency anymore. The next one, please. Then we have also innovations in how we construct high houses. This is a wooden building there. The next one, please. And most significant, perhaps, of all of these changes is that the money has become very cheap. So now it makes sense to invest into the future, because it's very cheap to get money from the financial market. So it doesn't bother if the payback time for individual consumer is quite long, because the money starts to be so cheap. As long as there's some payback in coming years, then it makes sense to invest in sustainable or energy efficiency or whatever issue in society. And then finally, final animation, please. And of course, people have started to change. They want to have an ecological life. And it seemed to be easier in less dense cities than in the urban cores. We used to think the otherwise, but now when people are willing to change their behavior, it's much more easy where there is flexibility in urban structure. So these are, I would say, innovation that has changed the society quite a lot. And what has become the outcome of this innovation? Could you take the next slide? What we see here is here are all the urban structures in Finland. And what we can see traditionally, the carbon footprint of residents in these different urban structures are quite similar. So in the inner urban area, in the outer urban area, and in the peri-urban area. We can see that it's surprisingly carbon footprint is the same in all of these areas in Finland. We can see some minor changes. We can see that in these peri-urban areas and outer urban areas, the private driving is more than in the urban core, but then the flights, international travel, it's much higher in urban cores, and also the energy consumption, it's a bit higher, and they use much more other consumption for services in the urban core. And when we put all these together, the carbon footprint used to be pretty similar in the dense urban core and in the less dense outer urban areas. Would you take the next animation? But quite surprisingly, if we look at the new urban developments, in Finland, what we have seen that the current climate policy actions and the voluntary behavioral change of people has started to influence the less dense areas. And actually we can see that the carbon footprint has started to become lower on those areas. But when we go to the urban core, when we had this rule of thumb in our head of our back always, that always when you densify, you reduce the environmental impact. And they didn't have any specific policy measures to the urban core. And what happened then is actually the carbon footprint has remained the same or even started to increase in some areas. And of course, for the general carbon mitigation, this is very critical information. We don't know how to reduce the carbon footprint in the urban cores, but we already know, and we have good examples and we have statistical significant reduction of emissions in less dense areas. Please, next slide. Yeah, so the following, please. And I tried to show that already in carbon mitigation, we had better performance in less dense areas. But now if we include the new dimension of climate mitigation, which is actually carbon neutrality, all European countries, EU countries have committed to carbon neutrality by 2050, and then Finland actually 2035. And this further emphasizes the change in our actions for climate mitigation, because next animation. Carbon neutrality means balance between emitting and absorbing carbon. So far we had just tried to reduce the emitting of carbon, but now simultaneously we try to increase the absorption of carbon. And even in reduction of emissions, the density didn't play too well in Finland at least. But when we are thinking about absorbing the carbon, actually the situation becomes even much worse. If you take the next one, please, 2 and the next. Because carbon absorbing is mainly done by the forest, soil and oceans. And if you think about the dense city like we saw in the previous in Ulrika's presentation, they are not not enough space for forest and soil and so on. We can increase the absorption, but not even closely to the area where you have less dense populations. So clearly the carbon neutrality raises the bar for urban development and smart density in urban areas. Next animation, please. Of course, to some extent we can use carbon offsetting. Like I showed at the beginning, cities create a lot of wealth and they have a lot of money, so they can start to buy carbon offsets from the surrounding area or from the other parts of the whole globe. But that's only a temporary way of reducing carbon. It's not actually reaching sort of long-term carbon neutrality. Next slide, please. So this is a typical example if we start to densify in a city. This is a real case in Helsinki region, and I have put the EU and the national climate mitigation targets to the scale. So in 2030 we should reduce the carbon emission by 4%. In 35 in Finland we should be carbon neutral, and then finally by 2050 we should have done all the carbon mitigation actions that we are going to do, everything. So if you take the animation, if we construct a new area in capital region, we first cause this carbon spike, and then we start to operate the building, and the operation energy causes emissions. But like we can see, by all of the climate mitigation targets, our original construction carbon spike is higher than the operation phase. The next one, please, or two next animations. Typically what we then suggest are these green buildings, which reduce radically the energy consumption of the buildings, or in some cases even produces more energy than consume themselves, and are called carbon offsetting or energy positive buildings. But like you can see in the photo, it reduces the operation phase, but the original carbon spike is still huge, and we only increase the amount of emissions in society with these green buildings. And if you take two additional animations, the next one. So just for comparison, if we just keep on using our existing buildings, very poorly designed energy wasting buildings, we perform almost the same. And with renovating the existing building stock, we perform better than these very expensive, highly sustainable new green buildings. That's clearly a challenge for urban design in the future. Next slide, please. So what is important from my perspective when we talk about this smart density in cities, that climate mitigation is already different from carbon neutrality. Next animation. And it's clearly a paradigm shift for urban planning at the moment. We know a bit how to reduce the emissions, but we hardly have any ideas how to make a carbon neutral or carbon positive urban structure. Next, please. So 3 points, 3 bullet points, you can take them all out. Timing is essential. This is very challenging time for new construction because the original carbon spike is so high. Carbon neutral operation is not the solution, like I tried to show. It could be a solution for carbon mitigation, but carbon neutrality, it's clearly only a prerequisite, like I tried to show with the spike. Current policies and innovations, was almost the first slide, seem to help in relatively low density areas. You can take the fourth one as well. And then carbon absorbing favors green in cities. All of those somehow emphasize that perhaps the densification that used to be our solution for carbon mitigation in urban area is not the best solution at current time and space. Next slide. So where we are now then. So this is a very famous picture about Greta Thunberg meeting Donald Trump in UN in 2019. But for me, it has a lot of content in it. It says, of course, the direct implication is that the future generation look at us, people in power at the moment, that you have to do something, that the world is not sustainable at the moment. But more significant meaning, which is under the surface, is actually to go back to this blonde guy in the front. This younger generation, they don't have the capability or power or knowledge to make the change. We need to make the change in 10 to 20 years. So we are the ones who have to make the change in society if we aim to sustainable cities. So we have to focus our attention back to this front, and we are the ones who make the change. The younger generation can only be a motivation for us. And then the next slide, please. So the final conclusions for smart density. So time shift for sustainable urban planning. Next. Smart density seems to be moderate for sustainable cities, not extreme like we used to think. Next. And then sustainable lifestyles, if you look at the historical data, have been easier outside the urban core, although we thought that it automatically happens in the dense urban cores. And then the next one, please. And I suggest that we need to create the concept of urban landscape. It has to take into account what we already have on the markets, and we have to use those elements. We can't just sort of wait for the future innovation and future concepts, because we only have 10 to 20 years of time to make the change. And then the final slide. If I try to sort of still concretize what was the main message of the presentation, that in current time, actually the smart density seem to be less intensity in urban cores, in urban landscape. So yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Seppo. And Seppo also has this question to all of you. Why do we densify sustainable cities? And this, again, you can find in the chat, the link to the Menti, and please provide your answers there.
Now we are ready for the third presentation. And the speaker will be Bjørn Ginman from Denmark, Copenhagen. You come from an office called SLA. You're a landscape architect and a project director in this company. And the company operates within the fields of urban space, city planning, and landscape architecture. You are interested in science and research, mixed-use development, sustainability, and public life. And I think all these topics are present in your coming presentation. So do we have Bjørn there? Your topic today is nature-based solutions in the middle of Copenhagen. So now we are going to Copenhagen.
Greetings from a rainful Copenhagen. It's cold and rainy here. It used to be the same weather in Finland. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to talk a little bit about SLA and our solutions, especially in the cities. I have brought this project that we just gave to the city of Copenhagen, or we did that 1 or 1.5 years ago. It's St. Kjelds Plads and Bryggervangen, and I'll try to explain a little bit about our methods for this project, and actually for the most of the projects that we do all over the world. I'm a team leader on the office for a 12-person team working with the projects in all the Nordic countries, Norway and Sweden, and also in Finland. And I decided to start just shortly to tell you about that we actually did the master plan for the whole campus area of Aalto University some 3 years ago. It's a master plan that is based on basic nature and landscape principles such as climate adaptation, biodiversity, and of course the social upgrade that also lies in this area. It's a huge plan that the city and the municipality now uses for the further development of the campus. Then we made a more detailed project around Alvarinaukio Park, where you see the old Aalto and Pirtila buildings around the park, and we did a project showing that we actually could transform this huge grass lawns into a climate adaptation project. And there was of course to try to bring the knowledge from the university into play, because there is a lot of knowledge, but it's a very you could say old school plan in the way it is right now due to climate adaptation. And here you see a project that we actually works on at the moment, and we will start to construct that. I hope this year. It's this building, Dipoli, and it's Pirtila's main building for the whole campus. A really exciting project because it really talks into our way of thinking. Because he as the text says, it will disappear in what he called the Finnish garden. The forest will grow back, and the building will be a part of nature, so to speak. And the next picture is a visualization of the new what is called a pedestrian route that will connect Dipoli to the rest of the campus in a better way than it is today. Here you see a vision, maybe some years in the future, showing that we re-establish the forest that is not there anymore. But back to Copenhagen. This is a climate project. We work very much with trees. We work with trying to get as many trees into the middle of the cities as we can. And with this project, we actually proved that is actually possible in a very hard and hard surface city. We planted more than 600 trees in a neighborhood. If you take the next picture. It was just to tell you, it was a competition that we won back in 2015. The next slide, please. It's just to tell us it's in the eastern part of Copenhagen. You can see the density around. Just take the next picture, and it's a long street called Bryggervangen, and along that street there is a huge and some smaller squares along with that we also use for coping with the rainwater, which was the main goal. That was what the municipality asks us to make a project that could cope with the increasing amount of rainwater, but we gave so much more to the actual site. Next, please. We started out, as in many cities, with a lot of asphalt. And here you see this is St. Kjeld's square that we turned into a huge forest, but this was how it was before. Asphalt around a huge roundabout with a grass lawn in the middle and some huge trees, quite nice trees that we reused. I will get back to that. Next one. This is down the street, where you also see huge areas of paving and asphalt that is just sending the rainwater directly into the basements of the buildings. Next, please. This is a vision from the competition showing the same spot as a recreational green urban space with a lot of activities coming to. And the next picture is from the same spot when we handed it over, and we planted the area. You see a new pavings, and you also see in the middle a huge line drain that leads the water through the whole project. Yes, please. This is from the other end, also with a long line drainage, and you see a sidewalk, and you see a green rain bed along the sidewalk, and then you see the street. This is the basic profile of the street that we are leading all the rainwater directly out in the rain beds, both from the sidewalk and from the streets. As you see, there's a lot of trees, and we know, as we also heard before, that trees and forests absorbs carbon and contribute to this in a very positive way. So the next, please. So what we did with this project, and it's very important to remember that this is. There was a pilot project for the first and the biggest one so far for the municipality of Copenhagen, and the idea is to upscale it. We can upscale it to the rest of Denmark, or even the rest of the world, because we know now that we can actually change our cities into much more green and wild. Spaces and when we please take the next one to take a short introduction of how we think it walks on two legs. The one is the first one is utility, and the other is amenity. It's basically what you can measure and what you can feel, because we know it's very important for us as humans to be in contact with the nature, but we also have to have it to work. The next, please. So we see nature and as a kind of machine that. The resolution is not so good, but you can see a forest in the middle working as a machine. It cleans the air, and it takes the noise if you do these forest plantings, and they hold back rainwater and carbon and things. So yes, please, next one. So we have this circle. We plant a lot of trees. We are having the water from above, also from underneath sometimes, and this boosts biodiversity and wildlife in the cities also. And as humans, we get a lot of experience with all this tactility, having these much more wild settings in the cities. Next, please. Yeah, this is just showing how we use the whole all the surfaces, but also the green areas, how it works. So when it rains in daily rain in the first one, and cloudburst in the last, just to explain how all surfaces are used. But it's in the green areas we use the water for having all these plantings. Next, please. This was how the roundabout on St. Kjeld's Plads looked previously. it's a huge street where you have sidewalks along the building facades and the green area in the middle. So you really cannot access the green area because you have to cross the road. Next one. Yeah. So what we basically did was to minimize the roundabout as much as we could, and then moved all the green areas. The next, please, to the edges, and then adding bicycle lanes and pedestrian walks through this green area, the forest, so that you could be away from the traffic and experience all the nature. So the next one. And then we, of course, I would not go much into that, but then we work with these different kind of nature typologies. Some that really copes with the rain, a lot of water in periods, but also very dry periods. We know this also is an issue when we do the plantings and the typologies. And the next one. So this was how the plan on St. Kjeld's looked like in the competition. And the next one, when we this is actually the final one, where we closed one of the streets and we took away all the bicycle lanes. It's much more safe in this area, where we actually got the speed of the traffic dramatically down, because we minimized all the traffical areas, the streets and the roundabout and so on. So we actually got some huge coherent nature spaces. And the next one. Yeah, it's just section showing actually we had bigger trees than this planted, but you see how the traffic is like running in a forest. So we have a lot of trees between the car traffic and the houses, the residents. The next one. Yeah, is showing the size of and the next. A Google, a fun photo from Google showing both of the sizes, the old and the new roundabout, and it also tells the story of how much traffic, how much space traffic takes in the city that we know. Can actually many places can we reduce the traffic areas dramatically. And the next one. Yeah, this shows one of the existing trees that we have. We had to take about 30 trees down. We took them out with the root ball and everything, and then we put them out in the area for boosting wildlife and biodiversity, and of course the kids. This is a perfect playground for kids. It's not a classical playground, but we see a lot of kids in these forests in the middle of the neighborhood. The next one, just showing the size of it and the wildness of it. This is a picture from when we handed it over. It really has grown, and you can see these parts inside the green area. And actually, when we have had a lot of rain, this is almost one big lake. And the next one, just showing all these smaller spaces. This is in front of the local church. Always with a lot of trees and plantings. Next one. So what we see is a lot more people in the street. Cafes are popping up, and we can see that the traffic has gone down because it's people take other streets, and you have to run or drive really slowly through these. So these three types of transportation really works well together. Bicycle and pedestrians and cars, of course. Here you also see how dense the plantings are in the middle of the square. And the next one, I think this is, it just shows that we also have smaller grass lawns where people can hang out and enjoy. You actually cannot feel the traffic when you sit there. It's really amazing. And of course, it also affects the prices on the flats around. They are really gone up, and it's people are really happy about it. And the next one, I think we are about being, I will end with the same photo as I started with, showing St. Kjeld's Plads. We planted more than 100 different species, and so the next one, I think that's, thanks for listening. This was what I think I run over time, but it's a huge project. There's so many things I want to tell you about, so that's it. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Bjørn. It was very exciting to hear about the project. And his question to you in the audience is this: if wild nature is so important to us, then why do we not have more of it in our cities? So the same thing, we ask you to go and check the chat, and you should find a link to the Menti, and you can provide the answers there. So feel free to take time and provide those key words, key insights that come to mind in this question. But let's move on to discuss with you all. And for the discussion, I try to open the first
densification.
And here we can have a look at this, and I will take over to the discussion, please.
Yes, thank you, Tiina. Yes, thank you all three. Really great different kind of approaches to this carbon smart urban landscape, which is the topic today. Excellent presentations. Now we have about half an hour time to discuss these questions you have set to the audience, and we think that we do it so that we invite all speakers here to share the screen. I mean, it's not exactly so. The company who is organizing this and operating the studio, they will organize it so that you can see all speakers at the same time here in the panel discussion. So let's now see how we will do it. I think that we, first of all, you all now see the answers, and it would be nice to get the comment from each panelist. But then also, my first question to each of you is that you could comment this: why do we actually densify sustainable cities? And this is related to Seppo's presentation. With the order we handle this is, first we talk about this densification question, then secondly we go to this practical example we have, and in the end we then talk about the policy making and the national approach to the topic. So, are we ready to discuss the first very tricky question? Why do we actually densify sustainable cities? As we could notice from Seppo's presentation, that those initiatives and policies we have run lately in our cities, there were pictures from Sweden, and we know that it happens in many big cities at the moment. So there is the tendency to higher and more dense urban inner areas. and what those research shows that the result is maybe something we don't expect actually from this process. So how could you please comment this? There is one word which comes, it is money and capitalism, the laws of capitalism which are raised by in your answers. So please, maybe Seppo first, and then we take also Ulrika and Bjørn to comment this. It would be nice to hear you. What do you think about this? Why are we doing this?
So from my perspective, I'm in real estate economics, and clearly there is this short-term economic benefit of densifying the city. So the local municipalities try to increase the value of land because typically they make money with the land, and because the cities are competing against each other, they don't want to raise their taxes, but they somehow here sort of silently compensate the higher taxes value of land. And at the same time, on the real estate development side, they of course are interested in creating more value, more intensity in their business processes with the densification. And then if you combine the transportation network, it's so easy to manage. It's sort of centralized system that you have this metro station, a lot of development on top of those, and try to create a lot of intensity to those areas. So it's sort of a short-term optimization of economic equation. That's, from my perspective, clearly one reason for this. And the other one, of course, is this general belief that, okay, if we densify, we intensify the usage of space, and that reduces the emissions, but clearly it doesn't apply almost anywhere in Europe or even in USA.
What do you think? Why do we densify?
Are you calling me?
Yeah, I'm calling you. Yes, Ulrika.
Okay.
Yes,
No, but clearly there's a multiple reasons for that, and I think at the moment the economical interests are walking hand in hand with the housing shortage, and you can actually now you'll be able to supply people with homes and housing, even though they're very expensive in these densified areas. And of course, the smartness of economizing with infrastructure and things like this. So there are, of course, lots of incentives and motives for that. But we have also quite interesting research in Sweden where we are comparing what are the benefits truly of densifying. And you can see there's a lot of negative aspects like noise pollution and things people feel unsafe and things like this. So, but the politicians, they don't hear that. They just hear there's a big loud megaphone calling out that this is the sustainable way of doing it. And I think another one, well, there's the mindset of New York, and how the image of a creative and inspiring city. Although we can never build New York in Sweden, never. It's built on completely different. So it's, but I think that's the mind of the politicians and the economists. And also the architects. We all go there and look. And I mean, we have it in our backbone.
One of the paradox of I think our profession is this, how we are in a way dependent on this. Yes, then Bjørn, what do you think? How
go to New York.
Yeah. Bjørn, how do you see in your practice when you work with this greenery, this question of densification? How do you get those places for greenery, and how does it in practice the discussion go with this in this development and urban design processes?
Yeah, it's really, this discussion is really crucial, and it's really interesting the project that I just showed you is in existing and an older part of Copenhagen, but we have a lot of new construction going on and a lot of discussions because the city is expanding and now we are building all over Copenhagen and really dense new parts of the cities pops up everywhere, but it's like we forget the green areas. We forget that we actually like to pay for living close to air and to green, to be in contact with the green environment. And it's like that the planning in Copenhagen and also in many other cities, it's like we forget that, and we know that the quality of living is connected to if we have space around us and we have access to green areas, and that has really been emphasized. We all see that here in the Corona crisis, that so many people has discovered that there is not much green areas to find, especially not in Denmark. It's disappearing for us, and therefore it's really interesting to take that discussion in the planning phase, because that's where the discussion really lies. Because as we see in Copenhagen, it just gets more and more dense with buildings, and the streets between the buildings gets more and more narrow, and to like benefit on building as many square meters as possible. So that's we see that as a huge problem for the living quality in the city.
What is happening in all of these growing cities and also in Nordic countries, but not only here but also worldwide. And there is the challenge for us then. Then we go to the second question. And if we can show the results. If the question was about if wild nature is so important to us, then why do we not have more of it in our cities? Seppo, doesn't the capitalism work here when we think that if people want that, so why don't we get it more of that green? Is it so that there are bigger things in a way which run over that? Because we always say that what is the demand, so that somehow should be seen in the production, but somehow it doesn't.
So to some extent, we see the value of nature. So if you are at the seashore, for example, those buildings are much more highly valued. And actually then you buy yourself space. You are in the front of waterfront and you have a lot of open space in front of you. And those apartments are much expensive. And bit similar actually close to the golf courses. Those real estates which are facing the golf courses are more expensive. So to some extent it works. But I suspect that especially in Scandinavia, it was relatively easy to access the green spaces in all of our cities. And we forgot to value those green spaces. And somehow I see it as a fluctuation that very soon, when we realize that for carbon mitigation, it's not important to densify. And for the well-being of people, it's totally the opposite. We start to revalue the green spaces between the cities. So in areas where you have a lot of affluence, people pay for that, but in a sort of general housing development, it's not. It's so expensive anyway that they have to save in all accounts in buying their new premises or renting their premises. So I think it's related to what they can afford. They would like to have it, but they can't afford it in cities anymore.
How much do you meet this discussion of money when you are developing your projects? What kind of role? Because people, the costs and money is the key words here. People have raised here in this in their answers. Is that the main reason?
Who are you?
I'm you, Bjørn.
Okay.
When you are working with these projects.
Well, there's many aspects of this. I think we are in a time where we can ask, can we afford not to have more access to green areas in the cities, or I mean, Denmark is also different from Finland, Sweden, and Norway, because there you think you have so much nature, so it has been very much about keeping the nature out of the cities. But that's not quite true. But that's another discussion that is really interesting. But of course, this is about money in some way, but as we see it, it's necessary, because the quality of the cities is going down if you forget to have space for access to green areas, or having these green areas very close to you, because it also has another function apart from the more sustainability things here, but because it reminds me that we have a huge crisis here. It reminds us it's just important to have around us. So it's when talking about how this is affected by the money issues. It's not that expensive, but it's much more a culture of what can you actually have in the city. So as I said before, it's very much in the planning of the cities. This lies, yeah. There's many aspects to it. So yeah.
I think now we turn to Ulrika and your question, because this is also related to this money. We can see that these financial incentives, you represent the national voice and policy making here in this discussion. And the question was here that how can the national politics support carbon smart landscapes? So, yeah.
Yeah, if we can just briefly show the answers, so that everybody can see what was given from the audience.
Yes, there we can see that the biggest trust in a way in our audience is on research and education. But then comes the financial incentives. But I think all these, and then communication is a question more of culture. How do we actually succeed in communicating? And it's a question of trust and all this. But then I think to these national aspects, these financial incentives, but also resources for research and education, which I mentioned here, they address the national policy making. How do you feel, Ulrika, the relevance of these answers? Please, Ulrika. Yeah.
I'm happy to see them. I definitely think there's a lack of research within this to address these issues. We have a lot of research at the moment on how green areas contribute to people's health and well-being. Now we talked about you need a green area within 300 meters in order to get all the health benefits, and there's so much evidence now, so we can't really not see that anymore. We have to put it into our policies. But concerning the carbon sequestration and also the biodiversity and how the urban green areas should interconnect and be interlinked in a green infrastructure, and how large it should be in order to provide biodiversity and wildlife, we don't really know yet. It's so complex, and we don't really have all the facts and figures. So I think we need more research there to actually see. And when we talk about carbon sequestration, for example, and how much water you can actually retain with a tree, all these facts are the basic data is from forest context, not really from an urban context, which is completely different, or could be, at least in most cases. You have like the urban climate is different, and the soil is different, and you have a lot of single trees, and not this forest system that you actually can calculate on. So I think research actually could contribute with facts and figures and give us more evidence and to work with these issues. It's definitely there. But I think also we need to include this issues in our national visions and strategies. Like I think you mentioned with this the carbon neutrality. What does it mean in an urban context? That we also have to balance. We have to absorb carbon in different ways. How can actually the urban areas contribute to that?
Seppo, you are a researcher, but you are also an educator. You have Greta Thunberg. You had the picture there, and also reminded us as a motivator the younger generation. But how actually, I think the results which you showed us, they are really groundbreaking and really raise, let's say, hot questions of our urbanization. But how is it when you discuss with your younger colleagues, researchers, and also those students? Have you is there any change, or how do you also feel your role as an educator?
Well, I have very positive experiences on those figures that we present and research. But I think mostly the audience is relief, because they thought that they have to go to very dense, let's say, dense spaces which doesn't support their well-being, but they know that they have to do it because of the climate crisis. And then when I come out with these results and show that actually you don't need to do it, it was a wrong way of thinking about the climate change. It was focusing only on the intensity of square meter and not seeing the whole picture, how it changes the lifestyles and how it doesn't promote your personal choices of sustainable being. So I think mostly they are relief, and I will see in the future that cities are much more livable because people realize that this is not something that we have to do. It's actually a system from 20s that we thought that as long as we centralize and densify, we will get more efficiency. And now we have shown that actually nature doesn't count on efficiency, but more like everything works in a sort of balance, not so intense way. So they are mostly relieved. Of course, there are some business students of mine that say that this is difficult equation. How can we produce wealth to the society with this kind of approach? But that's something that we have to reinvent. That was my proposal, that also the business system has to see how to produce wealth and growth with different kind of urban structure. It has been too simple for them so far.
Very often shown a short video of Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which is from 1929, and I really recommend everyone to look at that, because it is really quite a terrifying picture of a metropolis. And also when we talk about the smart city and the transportation, which has been very in the center of this development, so it's good to look at that old villa for the 20s from 100 years ago. So Bjørn, you are when you are working in your office, so how do you think about the educational questions? Do you find young landscape architects or architects who are, questioning or inspired or critical, or how do you see these questions with your young people?
Well, I'm also an educator. I teach on the Royal Academy here in Copenhagen for architecture, urbanism, and landscape. So this is a discussion that really goes on, because we can see that the younger generation, it's really on their mind to save the world, so to speak. You can see the political system is so slow and so old thinking in compared to what the younger people how they think and what they want to do. They think we are so old school. They say, "Come on, what are you waiting for?" So the picture with Greta Thunberg is really on its place today, because they have another interest than we had just 20 years ago when I came out from the academy. That was very much about shape and cool architecture and things. That's not on the younger people's mind in the same way. They just want us to do something and that is actually very close to the way we think at SLA. We really try to open up these very big discussions about. This is not about shape and cool architecture. It's about using architecture for do something. We know everything is going the wrong way. We can see it. Everyone can see it, no matter where you live. So we have to do something, and we can actually do something in architecture, planning, landscape. It's a complete new momentum we have as landscape architects, because we can actually do something, and we know that we can change things. So that is what we are working on. The political system is very slow and very old school thinking.
Yes, when listening to your presentations and the comments, so we can see very easily that we have a lot to do. So far it looks like that the mitigation has been the driver. When we think about the greenery in cities, and there is already some change to be seen, so maybe it has been the mitigation which has been the first background for this change. But then comes and raises the question of carbon smartness, which then again really shakes our system. And as Seppo said, that there is really a need for recreate a new concept for urban landscape. What do our cities actually look like when we go 30 years ahead, 2050, which is the one of those timelines? So it is to be seen. I think this last year we have lived now with this epidemic, so it has been important in that sense that it has really, at least when I think what are those processes I have really gone through in my mind related to our working and related to our housing, related to our cities and ways of traveling and all that. It's I think that is something, if you try to find something positive out of that, it is that it might have changed or shaped a bit our understanding of our living environment and the conditions we plan and design them. So these green nature-based solutions, what are they actually? And they are towards that we all should struggle. And we have all of us, we have different roles. Our speakers and we have different roles. Our participants, you come from different countries. This was now Nordic voices, and also localities are very different. So always we all have to, that is where communication and collaboration and this dialogue comes into the picture, that even though we have the global big challenge or mission of changing transformation, so we still have to always tailor those solutions locally. And there we need this discussion with people, so that because it is a big change in many ways. So I hope all our participants, you have got, I don't know if you are relieved, as Seppo told that students are after hearing you, but we should not be scared. maybe we should be inspired. I think that's the key point, to try to find those new ways. Our very warm thanks for the great presentations and the speakers from Denmark, from Sweden and from Finland. So Aalto University and Helsinki University and all those universities, we warmly thank you and wish you a good spring.
Thank you. Thank you so much for
Thank
my
you.
behalf as well. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much. A pleasure.